Hey guys, today I want to talk about another build for the Elemental Shaman in the Vault of the Incarnates raid. This is a single target focused build with the occasional AoE, which makes it good for Eranog, Dathea, and Raszageth, at least on normal through heroic. So before I go any further, I just want to say that I am not saying that this is the unquestionable best build for those bosses. It is just a very prominent one that we have seen in a lot of the top logs for those fights. Dragonflight has given us a lot of different talents to mess around with, and there is a lot of experimentation going on in those logs for these fights, but this one has been seen a lot, so I figured that it's worth talking about. Also, before I begin talking about it, I just want to say that for the class tree, I won't be getting too deep into this, as the only thing you really need to make sure that you have is improved Lightning Bolt, Nature's Fury, Fire and Ice, and Frost Shock. Everything else can be moved around a little bit to your taste for your specific group and what you need for that fight specifically. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the talents and kind of talk about how this build works. All right, so this is kind of what I consider the default version of the build, if you can even call it that. I've seen this point of Magma Chamber move to just about anywhere. I've seen it in Primal Elementalist, I've seen it in Improved Flame Tongue Weapon, I've seen it in Swelling Maelstrom, I've seen it in Flow of Power, and I've seen it in Elemental Equilibrium. But for right now, we will leave it right here in Magma Chamber, because that's where I see it most often in, say, like a Raszageth log. But again, you can kind of experiment with this and figure out what works best for you. You can change some of these other talents a little bit. I tried last week to, instead of using Primordial Fury and Flow of Power, I put those points in Power of the Maelstrom and Improved Flame Tongue Weapon. But the more I think about it and the more logs I look at, the more I kind of think that Flow of Power is just too good to give up, because all those bosses, Eranog, Dathea, and Raszageth, are primarily single target, and Flow of Power really helps you with building Maelstrom to then be spending on your Elemental Blast, and that's where you're getting a lot of your damage from in terms of a per cast basis. So I would highly consider using Flow of Power. I think it's probably kind of an auto pick nowadays from what I'm seeing in other people's logs. So the whole idea here is you want to be building Maelstrom with your Lightning Bolts and your Lava Bursts and spending on Elemental Blast, at least on single target. And as often as you can, you want to be using your Master of the Elements or Moat to be buffing that Elemental Blast. Make sure you're not overcapping your Maelstrom, because the whole idea, at least for single target, is to be building up to get to that Elemental Blast, use that Elemental Blast, and then get to the next one. So make sure that you're not overcapping that Maelstrom. Elemental Blast does a ton of damage, especially when you compare it on a per cast basis. You might be getting more damage from Lava Burst overall, but you're going to be casting a whole lot more Lava Burst than you will Elemental Blast. So you really want to maximize your damage with Elemental Blast. We have a couple talents here that helps benefit both single target and AoE. For instance, we have Mountain Zoa Fall and Echo Chamber. Both of these are going to help make our Elemental Blasts that much stronger, because now they can overload, and now the overload does more damage, but also it will help with your Earthquakes as well. We also have our Stormkeeper, which gives us that immediate pop-off in our AoE, and building a ton of Maelstrom to be spending on our Earthquakes, as well as our Earthquakes will then give us our Surge of Power, which will then buff our Chain Lightning just that much more. So a lot of things to help that immediate damage and get extra targets hit by our Chain Lightning. And so that's really good for those occasional ad waves for Eranog, Dathea, and Raszageth. So keep that in mind. I will say that this is not a consistent AoE build, so this wouldn't be good for something like Primal Council or Broodkeeper. If you're on the ads, that you might want something more like a Wildfire build for this, but for those bosses. But for this is more for those ads. They immediately come out, they might die somewhat quickly, or they need to die somewhat quickly. This build is really good for that. Keep in mind, this is not the primary use for this, but if the ads are taking too long to die, you can consider using your Surge of Power to spread your Flame Shocks, as well as using your Primordial Wave as part of that spread to then go into your Lava Burst and then hit all of those targets as well. That's something you can do, but in my experience, at least for those bosses, the ads die kind of too quickly to get really good usage out of this. The only boss that you could probably do this on would be Raszageth, because those ads stay up just a little bit longer. But in general, Primordial Surge kind of pushes you more into a single target type usage for Primordial Wave. But that doesn't mean that you can't get some usage out of that. In general, things should be dying a little bit too quickly for you to get that good of usage out of it. And then for the most part, Surge of Power is better to be used on Chain Lightning. But it does give you that option if you need a little bit more help with getting more consistent damage on all of those ads. But in most situations, that won't be necessary. For the most part, Surge of Power will mainly be used for Chain Lightning, for AoE, and for single target, you'll use Lightning Bolt. So yeah, that gives you a nice rounded talent tree that's good for both the ad spawns as well as for single target, and it's really not giving up too much damage in single target compared to, say, the Ice Fury and Flux Melting version, where you're not taking all this lightning bolt damage. It actually still does a good job on single target as well. So you don't really feel like you're giving up too much to gain the added benefit of that occasional ad spawns. So with that being said, we're going to talk about a little bit about how this works in single target, and then we'll get into some practical situations after that. All right, before I begin, I just want to point out that with Eranog, you're always going to be wanting to save your Stormkeeper for the ads, but in Dathea and Raszageth, we're going to be using our Stormkeeper in single target as well, so we're going to use that in our little demonstration here. So just keep that in mind, save it for Eranog. You're actually going to be using it in Dathea and Raszageth. So as often as you can, you're going to be wanting to line up your Stormkeeper lightning bolts with your Surge of Power, which is what we're getting after we use our Elemental Blast. So you can't always have this line up perfectly, but whenever you can, you really want to try to do that. So on pull for either of those two bosses, what you're going to do at around 3 to 4 seconds, or like 3.5, you'll pre-use your Fire Elemental, and then you'll start off with a Lava Burst with your precast into a Flame Shock, and then into Primordial Wave. You'll kind of have to do it in that order because Primordial Wave has a travel distance, and a travel time, so you won't be able to Lava Burst into your Primordial Wave. The Primordial Wave will hit after the Lava Burst, so you'll need to do Flame Shock and then Primordial Wave. So what it'll look like, so you'll do at around 3 seconds or 3.5, you'll use your Fire Elemental into a Lava Burst for your precast, and then right as the pull happens, Flame Shock into Primordial Wave, Lava Burst, and then Lava Burst. Use as many Lava Bursts as you get access to. And then I will use my Stormkeeper here, use my last Lava Burst, not overcap, Elemental Blast into Lightning Bolt, and then Lava Burst, and I'll try to get into, see, I won't quite get into range to use the other Elemental Blast. Got close. Sometimes you will be able to with your procs, but sometimes you won't, and when that happens, you're just going to have to not worry about it. So anytime we use our Elemental Blast, we'll want to immediately go into a Lightning Bolt to spend that Surge of Power. As often as we can, we want to be using our Primordial Wave, because we want to make sure that we're keeping that on cooldown, keeping it rolling, unless you're trying to save it for ads. If you're trying to save it for ads, I wouldn't wait longer than, say, maybe like 10 to 15 seconds. You don't want to keep it on cooldown for too long and lose too much single target, because for both of those bosses, the single target still matters a lot. But use that as at your discretion. And then at this point, we're just kind of keeping that rotation going. And that's basically it. Keep your Primordial Wave on cooldown. Make sure you're not overcapping your Maelstrom whenever you can. Try to line up that Stormkeeper with your Surge of Power. And see, like right there, I was able to get both Stormkeepers into that Surge of Power. But sometimes that won't happen. So don't sweat it if you can't get that to line up. Make sure you're keeping your Flame Shock active, obviously. Elemental Blast and the Lightning Bolt, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Pretty simple playstyle. Actually, pretty much all of the playstyles are fairly self-explanatory. But hopefully that makes a little bit more sense, at least with that Surge of Power. I know that can get a little confusing for some people as well. Again, a very solid playstyle, a really solid damage output for single target. It's not giving up too much. Obviously, if you get a Ascendance proc like I did right there, go ahead and use Elemental Blast if you would overcap your Maelstrom. That's still worth. You don't want to just keep using your Lava Burst even past the point of capping. Your Elemental Blast is that important. So if you get that Ascendance proc right at the end of your Maelstrom where you're about to cap, go ahead and use Elemental Blast anyway. I know that it feels bad, but that's the correct thing to do because of just how much damage Elemental Blast does. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into some Dathea footage, and we can kind of break down how that's supposed to play in that situation. Alright, so we're going to pick up straight from a heroic Dathea right at the beginning here. So again, I'm going to be dropping my Fire Elemental in pre-pull, starting off with a Lava Burst into Flame Shock, and then going into that rotation. Getting that Primordial Wave on cooldown, and building up that Maelstrom for the first Elemental Blast. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Stormkeeper, get that ready, Elemental Blast into that Lightning Bolt, and I'm going to try to build up to that next Elemental Blast. See if I can do it, and I can, because I get that Ascendance. But again, we don't want to overcap Maelstrom, so I'm going to go ahead and use that Elemental Blast into the other Lightning Bolt to consume that Stormkeeper, get that nice big damage there. And then continue on with the normal rotation. So Elemental Blast into Lightning Bolt, and then Primordial Wave came back off cooldown. So we're going right back into another Primordial Wave with that Primordial Surge, getting a lot of those Lava Burst procs. So here is the pull-in effect from the boss. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Spirit Walker's Grace and start walking away from the boss while still being able to cast. Now here I make a dumb, greedy mistake that I'm going to call myself out on. Don't do what I'm doing here. This guy has the mark and he's trapped behind this whirlwind, and I'm not giving him any space. Like, he has nowhere to go, and I'm just blocking him from escaping. So give him more space in this. I should be down over here, just away from him, because he has nothing he can do here. So I thought I could maybe finesse it, but as you can see, I just barely get my foot in. So I spread the shock. Don't do that. Don't be me. Give people with those marks more space. Anyway, continuing on. Continuing with the normal rotation, Elemental Blast into Lightning Bolt. But again, now I'm going to be holding my Primordial Wave because I know that an ad spawn is coming. I might have been able to fit another win in, probably not, but I wanted to make sure that I had it up for when the ad spawns here. And I'm going to be holding my Stormkeeper as well until I do the platform, because I'm in the first platform group. All right, so here comes the ad. So as soon as the ad comes out, I'm going to use my Primordial Wave on him. So now I have it on 2 targets. So the next Lava Burst I use will hit both, which is nice. And now I'm going to be focusing on the boss for the most part here, because sometimes you can rip aggro. I was having problems with ripping aggro off the tank, so I wanted to make sure I was not focused on him. And now the ad's going to die here, so I'm going to focus more on the boss a little bit more, just to get a little bit more damage in before we go do the platform. All right, so now we're getting knocked back. All right, so for here, I will have my Stormkeeper ready to be used on these ads, but first we got to pull them in. If you try to start using your Stormkeeper right away, it will most of the time not bounce to like all of them, or any of them sometimes, because of how spread out they are, so we need to collect them up. So I will position myself behind this one over here, because I see that it's off on its own, so I'll get behind it, use my Thunderstorm. So now we've got a nice solid group here. So I should have gone ahead and dropped an Earthquake first, but I went ahead and used a Chain Lightning first. And what I do is, after I drop this Earthquake, is I use Flame Shock on the Surge of Power, which I should not have done at all. I should have just double dropped Earthquake and then done the other Chain Lightning. But the reason why I didn't is because we had pulled this without a Death Knight several times, and we were having such a hard time grouping them that I was expecting these to take longer to kill. So I was expecting to need to get those Flame Shocks out to be able to possibly get into that Ascendance and hit all those targets. But as you're going to see, these melt now that they're in this perfectly nice group. So I do use a Flame Shock. You don't need to do that if your group can kill these super quickly, as I was saying before. But again, I use the Surge of Power on those Flame Shocks. Not the correct thing to do, but again, we had struggled so hard on it for the previous pulls. So again, what I should have done is just used it for Chain Lightning, double drop Earthquake, and then into another Chain Lightning, maybe another 2 drops of Earthquake after that. But again, it all works out. The ads are dead, and now we're going to get blown back onto the platform. And then it kind of continues again from there. So again, I know I'm not going back up to the platform again for a while, so the next time my Stormkeeper comes off cooldown, I do believe I use it on the boss. But that is basically the idea. Again, here comes more marks that are coming out, and you want to make sure that you're not hitting people with that. But other than that, that's pretty much the whole situation there. You can see that this build is really good for those occasional ad spawns and those occasional ad waves, but also still keeping up with your single target. And that's the big thing here, is you don't want to forego too much single target for only occasional ad spawns, and this build does such a great job at cleave, at the occasional ads, and it doesn't give up that much single target either. So this is a great build for that, and hopefully this was somewhat helpful in terms of the practical situation. Again, those ads died so quickly, and my way of handling was probably wrong. Again, Chain Lightning can do so much damage, and especially if you can get them grouped up and your whole team is helping you out, they can die super quickly. And that's the same on Eranog, that's the same on Dathea, that's the same on Raszageth. So again, for the most part, you really don't want to be using your Surge of Power on those Flame Shocks. As you can see, if things are dying that quickly, it's just not helping you out. So keep that in mind. Should have been using it on Chain Lightning, but there you go. So that's it for this footage, and now I'll just kind of do some closing thoughts about this build. All right, so again, just a really solid build, a really well-rounded build that gives you a good 2-target cleave because of Primordial Wave. It gives you that really good ad burst because of your Stormkeeper, and all of those things you don't even have to give up too much single target damage to get to them. So just a really well-rounded build, specifically good for those 3 fights in this raid. Will probably be good in later bosses as well as we go through the expansion. So just keep your eye on this one. It's a very good build. A lot of people are using it across those 3 bosses. So if you were kind of struggling to figure out what you should be playing on those bosses, this is a good place to start. Alright guys, hopefully this was helpful. If you found this helpful, please let me know in the comments. Really appreciate that. If you found that this wasn't helpful, let me know how I could do better next time. If you like the video, give it a like. Let me know. I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/ridmark, so give me a follow there. And other than that, that's pretty much it. So hope to see you guys in the next video.